And we're now coming directly to our next speaker, which is Marion Cornelia Legler from Bayer, talking about harnessing AI in healthcare. Marion is head of decision science and IT Pharma at Bayer, where her and her team responsibility is to implement data science and artificial intelligence solutions for and alongside with the entities of the pharma business. Marion holds her PhD in economics, where she started her career quantifying the macroeconomic footprint of the healthcare industry and its effects on financial equalization schemes to support political decision-making. Please welcome Dr. Marion Cornelia Legler.
Thank you, sir. Hello, everyone, and thanks a lot for having me. As I was nicely introduced, this is about AI in healthcare, harnessing AI in healthcare, and which is obviously driven me being in that position of driving that specifically at Bayer Pharma. A few words about Bayer as a whole. You probably know the big German company in this context. Our vision is really health for all, hunger for none. This is driven by the three divisions we have: pharmaceutical, crop science, and consumer health. If you take a look at the pharmaceutical strategy very specifically, you also might know that as well. So a large focus on oncology, cardiovascular diseases, women's healthcare, and radiology, but also now more and more investments also in the area of cell and gene therapy. But I was thinking about how to make this speech really interesting for you all. I imagine myself sitting in the audience, listening to someone who's maybe having the same job in the automotive industry or telecommunications. I would wonder, like, what is it really? What is it, AI, in this industry? So I have a little bit of, as an intro, a little bit of a landscape of what AI cases are we talking about, and then I'll move further. I put it into different sections, so providers, you have hospitals, you have resident physicians. Which kind of AI use cases do you have there? In hospitals, obviously, you have kind of decision support for physicians, for doctors. So what is a likely disease? What is the likelihood that this patient could have a certain disease given their medical history, for example? But you also have things like you might not think about, like the case prioritization. Patients come in, which patient do I take first? Resident physicians, there could be a lot of use cases around optimization of their reimbursement, for example, but also use cases in the area of rare disease identification. Why is that? Obviously, resident physicians have a broad education. They might not always be capable of finding exactly that rare disease. Talking about payers, in the area of payers, you have the public and private insurance. You have, for example, chatbots for customer support, which is very known, I think. But also the evaluation of the efficiency of a certain patient support program, for example. So let's say your health insurance has a specific bonus program. They might want to know if does it really make sense to invest in you, or very specifically in that bonus program? Do they get the healthy patients really back? Suppliers, obviously, over there's the pharmaceutical industry I am working for, but also the medtech industry. In the pharmaceutical industry, you have very well-known topics such as drug discovery. So what is, given a certain target, what is the best combination of proteins to really find a new medication for the future? But also things like, and that was for me at least, being interested in the healthcare area in general, but also, of course, in pharmaceutical industry, you also have use cases in the manufacturing area, right? You also have production scheduling over there, for example, given a certain portfolio of medications. You have the medtech industry, tumor identification on MRIs, for example. I think that this is also very well known, but also sound-based diagnosis, also something which is rarely new coming in. Think about Parkinson patients, Alzheimer's patients, where you can identify certain characterizations of the patient's voice about the progress of a certain disease. Last but not least, of course, we also have official bodies like the government. Also, they are having use cases, such as very prominent in the area of during the pandemic, the COVID pandemic, about screening or following the population's health, but also synthetic data generation, because obviously we have in our healthcare system a lot of patient data. How can we probably also provide that to the research community? This is also a hot topic currently in politics. Synthetic data generation might be a solution for that. Regulators, FDA, EMA, they have a lot of documents. There's a lot of NLP going on their end. Think about like Bayer pharmaceutical industry is launching a new drug. Obviously, you provide a lot of documents, clinical study, but also research on this. So a lot of NLP in this area. But now let's get, this was the broad aspect, like the broad view on healthcare. Now let's target this more about the pharmaceutical industry. And a few words from my side about the state of AI in the pharmaceutical industry. So very often you hear about the pharmaceutical industry, healthcare. We're lagging behind a bit, right, compared to telecommunications and automotive and all the others. So this is the perception. And this is also, if you count the amount of use cases, this is also true. But there is more to that. Yes, we do have challenges really in the experimentation phase. Just imagine we have a lot of data scientists at Bayer, but they cannot just go and say like, hey, I want to look into that data set today about the last clinical study, and I want to try a few things. I have a few hypotheses in my head. This is not possible in the pharmaceutical industry. If you have a hypothesis, you need to write a protocol, you need someone to approve that. It really has to be a valid use case you're searching for, a valid hypothesis, which is also making sure that no patient could potentially be harmed by that, even if the conclusions might lead to that. So imagine no one at Bayer can ever go and just simply take data and just look at it out of curiosity. There always has to be a certain process behind that. So experimentation, pretty hard in our area. But we have a lot of experience when it comes to the regulatory environment. So if we do a use case, if we work on that, we also make sure that everything down the road, up maybe until FDA and EMA, is also possible, that we can go into production and we also get the approval of the agencies, or GXP regulation, for example. Even if it impacts just imagine, we're finding something in the area of product supply, so manufacturing area, and we might change something a little bit. It might cause differences in the medication we're providing. So also this is regulated. So we have a lot of experience over there. So what I want to say? What do I think? Like, I think compared to the perception, the population perception about the state of AI in the pharmaceutical industry, I think we're making a lot of progress if you don't only count the use cases. So my take on this would be the AI adoption is more the sum of use cases in experimentation, use cases in industrialization, but also consider the complexity of a certain use case, not just simply counting. And the complexity, obviously, is not just data and models, it is also the regulatory environment, the regulatory framework. And I think one should consider that as well. So my key messages for this part is really, yes, we're not good in experimentation due to the environment we're working on, simply. This is why we love events such as the Bitkom event over here, because we need to learn from other industries. If other industries run first with applying certain models, we want to look at them, we want to learn from you all. But we can also give you something back when it comes to the AI Act. If I look at the AI Act from my standpoint of view, it's not a big issue, because most of the things we have been done anyways already as a pharmaceutical industry. We have always been doing that already. So this might be something that we can give you back when you're having issues with implementing certain regulatory frameworks. Let me tell you about a few use cases more specifically, which we're having at Bayer. So imagine certain cancer patients. So their cancer is driven by a certain gene mutation. Luckily, Bayer has a medication which is specifically targeted to those patients whose cancer is driven by that gene mutation. So the problem is that you only find out about that gene mutation if you get to NGS screening, which is pretty expensive, and not every hospital has this kind of NGS screening. So what we're doing, we're taking the very cheap, because anyways, available histology images. We're using computer vision, and we identify those patients who have the highest likelihood of their cancer being driven by this gene mutation. So we can identify those people, send them targeted to the NGS testing. So this is not only cheaper for the health system, but also they have a higher likelihood that they're really getting the targeted medication which they need. Another use case, very different, it leverages heavily, like we had computer vision before, and now more on the natural language processing side. Imagine you participate in a clinical study. So you visit the doctor, you visit the site, and you have a conversation with the doctor about your medical history, potential adverse events which that drug is causing. And the doctor is taking the notes in free text. This is indeed the fact. So our clinical statisticians at Bayer obviously can't just work with that free text. So it has to be coded into standardized terms and codes as well. So we've been introducing this. This is a very specific and was very successful project because we went from experimentation to industrialization, including GXP validation within 1 year. We also saved the company $500K per year because those were the license costs which we were paying for a different kind of or an alternative solution up until then. And this is really how we're using also natural language processing in this area. And this obviously has a high impact. Just imagine if we are properly coding what happens in the clinical study to the right terms and codes, the quality of the clinical study gets better, and the conclusions we can draw from the clinical studies is also getting better. And then something about the API scenario planning. No, this is not the API you're thinking about. This is an active pharmaceutical ingredient, so what the drugs are being made of. We have roughly 50 at Bayer, and they're being produced at 4 different sites, also at external sites, and we obviously have a changing portfolio. Just imagine some medications are demanded have a higher demand, some less. We have new medications, it's changing. We have supply chains issues, and so on and so forth. So also there's an optimization going on. At which site do we produce which amount and which part of an API? So those are 3 examples of use cases which we are very specifically driving at Bayer, where we're also running through, including the regulatory environment framework. So to close this, I was looking at the Bitkom page for this conference very specifically, and I saw, okay, this conference is running under the question, how can we ensure that innovations in AI make it to production? So I thought, like, okay, what are the learnings from my side? What can I give back? What are my takes on these very specific questions? And I brought 4 key messages for that. I started with the right use case identification. I think we should get rid of some data science teams, actually. So we started with data science teams in IT, right? And then they also increased, and we had that in the daily business teams as well. And I think that was a great move. It is very important to be as close to the business as possible to really understand it. I would even go a step further. If you still have those single data science teams, even within the business, they will always talk about data science. Rip those teams apart. Bring those data science really in the daily business teams. Make a data scientist, like a project manager, part of every team, and not just bring them together. Only by this, only when your data scientists are really part of the daily business, they will identify the right use cases, and they will nicely work on it because they have understood the data properly. Second part, still have your deep tech teams as well, obviously, because AI is coming so nicely accessible with all the generative AI stuff and everything which is going on nicely at the moment. That also means that more people can leverage on a daily basis, but only the off-the-shelf models. So if you really want to have your leap in accuracy, you need to have those deep tech teams as well. You're experts in NLP, you're experts in computer vision. You still need all of them, obviously, to really make that leap in accuracy. This is very important. Third part, so first one was use case identification. Second part was now a lot about experimentation, getting that accuracy. So if we have now that accuracy, how can we bring that model into production? So I made the experience that your machine learning engineer, your lead machine learning engineer, has to be really more or less the best person you have in your team. Because that person can shape the whole community of machine learning engineers, and they can bring in a certain framework. So how is everyone bringing things into production? Because you want to make it very easy in maintenance later. It doesn't help you if I have 50 machine learning engineers and everyone's taking their different approach how to bring things into production. You really need to have frameworks that everyone is really applying. So that person has to be really good, very well respected, and really make the blueprints for the others. And then, fourth point, party together instead of fighting alone. Because this is really what I'm seeing on a daily basis. And it doesn't matter which hierarchy level, AI is a big topic, everyone wants to be the best. So you still have this kind of competition going on, and you really want to bring those people together. Because if you don't work together in this area, you will soon fall back behind all the others. So interestingly, that such a simple thing is simply, in my opinion, still the most important one, because you don't get anywhere else. Good. I'm closing with this because I'm open for questions as well, which might be of interest for you. Thank you.
Thank you very much. If there are any questions in the audience, we have a microphone over here that we will bring to you, so just raise your hand if you have some questions. Just see any raised hands. In that case, maybe I have a short question to you. We also had an AI Act panel before, and I would be very interested because also the healthcare sector is, of course, one of the sectors that the AI Act will also affect. And I would be very interested if you could elaborate a bit on your position, on your view, how the AI Act may affect the healthcare sector, and what your priorities would be in that context.
As I mentioned, the AI Act, I've been looking into that, and there wouldn't be much change for us, indeed. At least as a pharmaceutical company. I think startups working in the healthcare area, it is very different for them, obviously. But really looking into what are we doing at the moment already. So as I mentioned, all those 3 use cases, we have to run under a regulated environment already. It is not much change. So there is indeed a lot of time we're spending on certain use cases, goes into documentation, all these kind of things. The experience we made is that all the frameworks which are there, so I think it's talking about GXP regulation at the moment, is really much targeted to software engineering and not yet AI engineering, I would call it. So still we have to make progress, because if I'm bringing forward a use case at Bayer and they're saying like, you have to validate this, all the steps I have to run through, all of that is still targeted to software engineering. And it doesn't really fit. The questions we have to answer don't really fit what we're doing in the sense of the AI use case. To make it very specific, you don't have to do so much testing, or you have to do the same testing, obviously, but on top you have different kind of scenarios you have to run through. And this is not yet included, and this obviously has to change as well. So everything a lot about software engineering still, that kind of thinking, okay, what does have to change when I'm doing AI cases is very different. But the overall umbrella will be very similar, and for us it won't mean a lot of change, actually.
Thanks a lot.